Greg, welcome back to the podcast.
Good afternoon.
All right, we've been rolling through a lot of fruit of the Spirit, and we're going to take a little shift today, maybe get into maybe some sports. I laughed earlier because Wes, I saw him ask you, this was back when the Razorbacks were playing. I forget who it was, but it was a tough game.
I think it was Tennessee.
Yeah.
I predicted we would lose, and we won.
And they won.
Yeah.
And then he asked me about Georgia playing Ole Miss and then Tennessee, and I said, I think we'll beat Ole Miss and lose to Tennessee, and it literally the opposite happened.
Yeah.
So we don't know what we're talking about when it comes to football, but we do love sports.
Yeah, and this is a good encouragement for you not to gamble because
Exactly.
we know our stuff and we're wrong consistently.
You're wrong.
Yeah.
Don't do it. There's a podcast. You and Wes do that one, or I can't. But that was wisdom right there. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump into a question that has to do with sports, but also just life and. What does it mean to be a team? And, I guess that's a broad stroke question, but, we see this in business, in churches, in organizations. Obviously, sports is kind of the angle we're coming from, just thinking about that. But what does it mean to be a part of a team? We were talking earlier, NIL has kind of changed what it means to be team these days. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, on its simplest level, I think a team is a group of, I don't want to say disparate parts necessarily, but, an individual, a collection of individuals assembled for a common purpose.
Okay.
And, that's what a team is, whether it's a sport or a church or whatever. You got to have shared values and everybody be pulling the sled in the same direction. And I think that's where it's got to begin. I think part of our speculation, you may have a follow-up question, but, I'm certainly, as a longtime football fan, I'm watching the changes that the NIL have brought to the college landscape particularly, and I don't see the sense of team that there once was. I think, and even we were talking more in terms of I don't see the buy-in. Kids aren't, like for me, they're not excited to be a part of the University of Arkansas football team. They're getting paid. I mean, it is what it is, and I'm not necessarily opposed to some of that pay. We don't have to go down that road. Yeah. I think getting fair compensation for the bukus of money that the NCAA was making is one thing, but now you've got a thing where they're just paid to be there, and they don't want to. They're not a Razorback. They're not fighting like. I thought about this idea of having this conversation in the wake of the Arkansas-Texas week, which for me growing up, Arkansas-Texas was a defining moment every year. And I wanted to beat Texas, And this past week when the game, I could care less because I don't think they care. The team running out there on the field, they have all their different motivations for being there. They're getting compensated, they're getting whatever it may be, but they no longer really identify as the University of Arkansas. They're just passing through. It's a step, and I didn't even think about it in our earlier discussions. We were kind of warming up for this discussion, but there's also that human level. I don't see unity among teams like you used to see. I think there's a lot of infighting, and I know we heard the rumors about Arkansas, particularly last year. You had a couple of really well-paid guys who transferred, and they had kind of turned off the locker room from what all the media sources said, because they were kind of prima donnas, and they were getting paid, and other people weren't. This whole system just creates fissures in team. And I think that's where, for me, if we back up and look at it from a church perspective or even a family perspective, I mean, those kinds of things destroy a sense of team. And team it's so important. And most of us growing up, we learned really valuable things by being a part of a team. I think for years we've been fighting as a culture the independence, the selfishness, the self-pity. Those are not biblical values, but and team is one of the places where you teach someone, maybe to run counter to some of that culture. And anyway. Yeah,
I looked up earlier, we were talking about it, but the NCAA on a yearly basis, as of an article I saw on ESPN, $19 billion that That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. I mean, I think there's some benefits to NIL. I mean, I think players getting, having money to, whatever, provide for family, that's great. But it definitely feels like one of your phrases I picked, jump the shark. It's gotten to an extreme that's, it's not helpful for a team. And so I guess that would be my question is in any, let's just look at for NIL, like, is that helping or hurting them even know what the goal is? I mean, when you say come together for a common goal, like, do they understand what, I wonder how many of those players, like, I know, okay, to win, okay, national title, sure. But really, like, is the goal really, are they going to wake up and see that the goal is for them to get theirs? Like, it's about getting what I can get. So whatever school can give me that, like, I'm on the board.
Yeah.
Oh, you want, enter the transfer portal. Here we go. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I wonder how much of that has blurred the lines for what our goal really is. We say national championship, but do we really know what it is? Is it really more about me?
Yeah, it's definitely changed in a hurry. And I think, for the purposes, to me, of an intelligent discussion, it's worth keeping in mind the ages that we're talking about here, and also the institutions that are doing it. And that's what gives me the most heartburn. If you back all the way up, I was at the University of Arkansas covering sports for many years. Totally agree that the NCAA was making a lot of money off athletes. And it was never fair compensation. Yep. I know I had lots of friends in the band, and they're like, well, we don't get, we just get a scholarship and we're happy about it. Like, yeah, but you don't have to do interviews. You don't have to fly to Oxford to play a game. I mean, there was never a commonality. It's not apples to apples, and your activity as a part of that band is not producing millions of dollars for the university. So again, I understand all the ways that we backdoored a position where these athletes should get compensated, but if I can put on my common sense hat for a moment, I would say, but we lost in all this mix somewhere the reality that these are 18 to 23, 24-year-old kids. They're young men, most of them by the time their career's finished, certainly. But also, it's called college football. What's the point of college? Well, the point of college, I thought, was to get an education and sort of find yourself and figure out what life's all about and prepare for the next step of your life, which is usually professional life / marriage, family, those things. Well, so now we've basically made college sports into being a job for these guys or these gals. There's plenty of NIL money, not as much for women's athletics, but it's running that way too. College has now become a job and a place to make money. For some of these, I think these athletes understand I'm probably not going to make it to the next level, so I need to make as much money as I can now. And again, in all this, we're forgetting this is an 18, 19-year-old kid. They need to learn how to budget. They need to learn how to go to class and be disciplined and study and advance their degree, because those are life skills, and being a part of a team, by the way, are life skills that will pay off for the rest of their life. Instead, we're just handing them money, and we're saying, play for us this year, do your best. We're going to try to win a game, but if I don't teach you anything, I don't teach anything. And if you don't like what you're being taught, or you don't like how much you're getting paid, just cash out in the portal and go somewhere else and start all over again. That seems to me to be totally counterproductive to academia, but also just common sense. Are we making these kids better people? Are we maturing them? Are we teaching them about team, how to be disciplined? The values are gone.
Well, how many people, when they get in the workforce, they don't work well with others, so what do? I'll quit and get a different job.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what the pattern would be. That's not sure, are there times you need to shift? Sure, of course. But that shouldn't be our default always.
No.
Conflict, let me run, let me get out of this situation. I think we're missing an opportunity to experience team. I mean, there's that dynamic, let's say a kid is going to have 4 years at a school and hopefully with the same coach, right? Maybe there's a transition of coaching.
That's changed too.
That's true too. But I mean, yeah, there's something about having the same group of 60 guys, whatever. How many guys are on a college team these days? I don't even know. Is there a cap on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can have like up to 80, but I think you've got I think like 54 athletic scholarships, something like that.
Yeah. So yeah,
I may be
60,
wrong.
70 players. But there is something fun about. Now I know there's a little bit of turnover every year, but you've got a core group of guys that you're with, for a season like that. We're kind of missing that. I mean, I wonder how rare that's becoming, for someone to be at the same school for 4 years.
Yeah, I think it's very rare. And yeah, for me, that's what's caused, again, we're talking the dynamics of the NIL, but the results of the NIL have caused me to lose. I just don't have an energy for college sports anymore because, I mean, I grew up, I can name you names that only probably a few people on this podcast are old enough to remember, like a Tony Chirico, great example for me. Nobody will know who he is, but he didn't grow up in Arkansas, but he fought to make the football team, wound up being this walk-on sensation before Burlsworth was a thing. Great nose tackle, undersized, played hard, ran through a wall. And, he played his whole career at University of Arkansas. I remember him from my childhood. Those guys don't exist anymore. We had one. We mentioned KJ Jefferson. What'd he do?
Yeah.
He decided he could get more money and go play for UCF. I mean, it's like, what do you do with that fandom? Well, I guess I'm cold-hearted enough. I'm like, well, if he doesn't care about the University of Arkansas, I don't really care about him, and I'll never think twice about him.
Yeah.
It's all changed. And so I have a growing distaste for college football, I guess, because of that rotating door of personalities, and guys come and then they don't like it and they go. And it's hard for me to get invested. I know we did a podcast where we talked about how it used to be you followed a guy, you followed a career. And I think certainly that made college sports different because these were young people and they were at your university, or the state university. And I mean, it's just not that way anymore.
You think a shift will take, you think players will at some point realize that I'm missing out here? Like, at some point are people going to realize maybe it's like money is great, but at the end of the day, there's probably... like it's not solving all my problems, so maybe I should consider.
I mean, I think there will
some of that come back, or is this just going to keep sinking into a deeper?
That's what's hard. I think because of the way it's been rendered from a legal perspective, I think once you grant the freedom, I think it'll be very, very hard to reel it back in. Because again, you can make a real good case that these athletes always deserved a percentage of what was being made off of them. So how do you reel it back in? How do you regulate? I'm not sure the law will ever allow that. But if you look at it from a spiritual perspective, I've always said that the greatest proof that there is a creator, I know I'm making a big transition here, but the greatest proof that there's a creator is that without intervening forces, all of life gravitates toward chaos. You build a house, you leave it long enough, and it becomes dust, basically. So there has to be some maintenance. There has to be sustaining, and we can talk about microevolution and macroevolution, and, there's examples of some of both. But this whole idea that there was nothing and then boom, suddenly there was all this complexity of life and, oh, isn't this amazing? All of life around us tells us that's not true, that it tends toward chaos. And that's what I would say about the NIL and collegiate sports right now. Barring some miraculous intervention, it's already into absurdity, in my opinion. It's only trending further that way. We're headed toward chaos. And I don't know what it's going to look like, and I don't know what's going to happen, but I do think the business model is imploding. Yeah. There's professional sports for a reason. Yeah. I don't know if we need, a minor league system in this, but that's what it's become.
Which means that maybe that, to your point, you're losing some of the traditions of the schools, of that connection and that passion to represent or be a Razorback, that can be lost.
I think a lot of the things that made college sports what they are they're being lost right before our eyes, and I'm not sure what it's going to look like.
Well, hopefully that gets redeemed. I do love college football, and it's a lot of fun. And still, this has been my favorite year to watch. And I got some boys that love it, so it's fun. We enjoy it. But I guess thinking about team, and I think that's the saddest thing is that the best part about team is everybody playing this role together with one another to accomplish a greater goal that only happens if everybody plays their part.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's sad when it becomes selfish and it's just about me, then it's like, well, I don't, there's just no, you, and it's hard to accomplish great things together.
Yeah.
And how does that for you, just in life, we have a staff team, we say that. Would you consider a church, is that a team in the sense of, are we together? Are we trying to, what are some of the challenges we can face whether it's a staff team in a business world, church world, or just as a church or, as a people?
Yeah.
What are some dynamics that maybe we don't have NIL, right? But there's certainly the temptation for people to just look out for themselves has always been there, right?
Yeah.
Ever since the fall. So what are some ways, what are some ways we can be on guard against that? If we know that hinders team and that hinders us all accomplishing this goal that we want to go with, what are some tips on kind of maybe understanding our goal? Are we on the same page? And then being mindful of ways we tend to.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the big discussion that I think, that's where I try to be, a lifelong learner. You watch something like what's happening with college sports and you think of application and you think of your situation. And I definitely think, the church is meant to be a team. Now we have the blessing of having been given our marching orders by God himself. I mean, Acts 1:8, that's kind of our church. That's our purpose. We exist to take the gospel to the nations. And so, I think we have a unifying purpose. I think the temptation is always, well, how are we going to accomplish that? You can argue about this, that, or the other. And, I think there's something inherent in all men, women, you name it. We want our notoriety. We want to be famous, or we want to be, acclaimed, and all these things. And to me, that's the church is not a place for individuality. We're supposed to be conforming to the image of Christ. And we're individuals. We all have personalities, likes, dislikes, and it's fun to be a part of a team where there's diversity like that. But you can't let the diversity be in terms of the end game or the goal itself. It's good for me to be me and you to be you, but us both to be shooting at the same thing. In fact, it's better if I'm being me and you're being you and we're shooting at the same thing. And so I think in some ways we have it a little easier maybe than even like college athletics or whatever it may be. I think we all should be able to agree on what the end game is. But I do think some people don't like to be a part of a team because they're selfish, just on their surface. That's, they've bought into the Lone Ranger mentality, watched too many John Wayne movies growing up, whatever it may be. There is something esteemable, I think, particularly in men, that you can go, you're rugged and you can do it on your own. But that doesn't get you anywhere when it talks about moving an organism like a church forward. But I think that holds people back. But I also think it holds people back. We've seen it. I've seen it. I believe in team. I believe God wants us to be a team. I believe He sees a church as a team. Like you said, we've got a pastoral team. We've got servant leaders and our deacons. We've got life group leaders. We have all these parts that are a part of the team. I think the reason why team doesn't work well in church, outside of individuality, is that it's hard. People don't like to do hard stuff anymore. And so it's easier to say, well, I didn't like what my pastor said, or I didn't like the music today, or I don't like, the preschool department, whatever it is, and you just go somewhere else. And then you're there, but you're really looking for the next thing to be angry about, so you can go somewhere else.
We enter the transfer portal.
Yeah, you enter the transfer portal. I think people do that. The statistics show people are doing that more and more and more. Yeah. Although it's funny, they have all these articles about how often people move churches. And then I saw something the other day from Barna, which is like the big church research thing. And he said the statistics show that 86% of most church moves are a result of someone relocating because of a job. Like, well, that's not a church move. I mean, you know what? Of course you got to move churches if you change jobs and you move to a new state, But the other 14%, I'll give it, the other 14% is what we're talking about. It's church hopping. because what you're really doing, you don't want to be connected. You don't want to do the hard work of being connected. You don't want to let anybody in your business to where they can hold you accountable or help you grow in some area. You want to stay unmoored and independent so you can do your own thing. This team's hard. I mean, it's hard when someone knows you and says, okay, you look like you had a rough weekend. What were you doing? And they know enough to ask you were back with your college buddies hanging out. And, nobody wants to be known like that. They don't want to be held accountable like that.
You think part of it is too that nobody, in let's take football because we're talking about football. It's football season. It's the first year of a 12-team playoff. I'm excited about that. I think that's fun. Well, in football, everyone has a role to play. So like we have positions, right? You've got a quarterback, running back, offensive lineman, defensive backs, whatever, right? And so, hey, you're this position. We kind of now within that position, there's various roles that you have, and depending upon the plays call, like that can vary. But point is, you have a position. In the church world, part of it is it's hard to know, right? So what's some wisdom just on church members? Because we can have the habit, people can give college students a hard time. The truth is, we've seen it with all ages beyond. Like when you're old enough to drive yourself, it's easy to just show up to a church service and just sit in the service. And that's great. And hey, good job. Like you came to church today. You could have done a lot of things. You came to church. That's great. That's a good decision, right? Yeah. But often it can just stop there. So I'm coming to church and I'm leaving. I'm not in life group. I'm not really looking for. I'm just kind of there. So in that sense, I feel like we're missing it out. Like it's like showing up to practice and sitting there. Like I'm watching practice. I mean, I'm listening to what coach is saying, but I'm doing nothing. I feel like there's a little more we can be involved in. How can we encourage people to find their role? What position they might be good at, naturally gifted at by God. Like, hey, this is something we don't test those waters. How can we encourage people to kind of find that role on the team in church? Yeah.
Well, I think it's, listen and be engaged when we make a lot of pleas on a pretty regular basis. Brett had this Sunday where he's like, hey, here's all of our mission trips. If you want to go on a mission trip, come talk to me. Hey, if you want to get engaged at a church like ours, you hear that, go talk to Brett, And, but we put 511 up on the board asking for somebody to help, with the children's area. Of course, we're going to do a background check. Don't get me wrong, but there's almost always flares being sent up in a church our size for, hey, we need a little bit of this or we need a little bit of that. To me, again, the easiest thing, just step forward and say, hey, what do you need? I just want to serve, plug me somewhere. The problem is it's kind of like high school sports or younger maybe. Every kid, when they're in the 5th grade, thinks they're a quarterback. It's like, I've seen you throw a football. You're not a quarterback. I don't know. And so the hard thing is everybody wants to preach. We've had a memorable scenario where I met them one Sunday and they were wanting to preach. Yeah. Like, it's a church of 1,800 people. The odds that you get to preach anytime soon are pretty slim to none. But I do not know your name. No, you're not getting to preach next Sunday. I say be available, be present, volunteer for, again, I think we've kind of learned it's easier as a bigger church probably. We're looking for those people who are just willing to serve and humble themselves a little bit and say, hey, I don't, if it's making cotton candy at a block party, I'll turn that wheel,
And that is something we do.
And that's something we do. Opportunity.
I love that. No, I like that because part of it is you do have to be there because if you don't show up, you never hear about those things. Yeah. Like I do appreciate and value people just showing up, but I like that second level of, hey, start paying attention, whether it's announcement, the bulletin, from the stage, from, if you pay attention like you do here, like, oh, and I like you kind of saying, all right, let's pay attention to that and then say, now what are the person who might say, oh, that's not my thing. Yeah. Like, Bailey needs help in preschool. Well, that's not my thing. Yeah. What would you say to that person?
Yeah. Well, if you have a young child, then it's going to be your thing, whether right. But, I think the key would be, are you open to figuring out what your thing is? Yeah. Let's figure it out. Obviously, hey, refreshingly, there are a lot of people who don't feel like they're gifted or able to teach, so to speak. And so they're not signing up to teach a life group, but I get that. But, I think all of us can pray. We have a Wednesday night prayer sheet that, you don't actually have to come on Wednesday night to pray over those things. We often solicit prayer for mission trips. My thing is identify what's not your thing. Hey, that's helpful. You've checked something off. But let's keep working to figure out what your thing is, and
that's good.
There's something out there.
God will surprise you. I remember when, speaking of football, I went in walk on at Ouachita Baptist as a defensive end. Turns out I'm not a defensive end. I played linebacker and fullback in high school, maybe a little tailback, but was not. I don't have the speed for that in college, nor do I have the size to play defensive end. And so I think it was my second year. They're like, hey, we had our offensive linemen were going down like crazy. They're like, hey, we're going to try your offensive line. I'm like, sure. So, and I remember telling coach, like, all right, but if I don't earn a starting spot, like, because I wanted to earn some scholars, like, look, just put me on special teams, call it good, right? Because I knew I was going to put on some weight, and it just clicked. I loved offensive line, and I never would have guessed that.
Yeah.
So, I do think and I've seen that in life too. I've tried to, like, an opportunity I feel like God gave me, and no, that's not my thing. And then, God just kind of prompting you, hey, just try it. Quit saying that, just try it. Exactly. And then I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Well, two stories I've probably be able to throw in that regard. My worst class in college was speech. So Perfect. Where you had to, so the idea that I preach every week is kind of ridiculous.
That's
but,
awesome.
That's one of those things when I first started, like, sharing with a college ministry, I tried to do what I heard everybody else do, which was put together this nice, smooth talk and anchor it with a verse or two. And, it wasn't until I realized I'm not any good at that. I mean, that's why I can't do that. And then I had this weird epiphany, and I will say it had to have come from Spirit of God. I mean, it's like, just teach the Bible then. Quit being so clever and just teach the Bible. See how that works for you. Because if nothing else, you can walk away going, well, I at least taught the passage.
That's right. That's right.
And that's now kind of where I live. I'm like, well, if everything else goes wrong, at least I know we read the passage and I taught the passage and God's word landed, So that would be one. Another one, this is it's on the football subject. When I was at the University of Arkansas, I was a resident assistant, and I coached the freshman dorm. I coached the intramural football team.
Okay.
Well, freshman dorm, it was 9 stories tall. We had about 400 people living there, and a ton of those guys had played high school football, like for Little Rock Central, Parkview, North Little Rock Northeast, which doesn't exist anymore, I guess. But anyway, all the Little Rock schools, they'd come up to be whatever in terms of college. They were starters on their high school teams, but they weren't quite good enough to play D1 athletics, but they were pretty athletic guys. So we're having just put a bunch of bulletin boards out. You have tryouts. We had a bunch of people show up for tryouts, and I'm like, how do I decide who I keep? Like, okay, I'm gonna do 2 simple things. I'm gonna time a 40, and then maybe run some little pass drills, just see who can throw, who can catch. Well, so I start timing the 40s. I'm not kidding. We had 13 guys run like 4.6 or below. Because they were all, like, holy smokes, that's a lot of speed. This is like,
for guys no longer in sports, just hanging out, going to classes.
Here's the problem. Then we started running. So I'm like, well, I'll just take these 13 fast guys. Well, then we start running the passing drills, and not a one of them could throw or catch.
Oh no!
They all played defensive back. Every one of them is like, I don't have a quarterback. Well, and this is kind of where it comes into like team. I'm thinking, these are great athletes, but how do I compete? I'm like, well, we're going to run the option. So we ran the option in intramural football.
And did you just dominate?
And we were incredible.
That's awesome.
Because we just played zone on defense.
Yeah, nobody,
and
you stopped everybody.
Yeah, they couldn't throw the ball on us. They couldn't run the ball on us. So, we won a bunch of games, couple scores to nothing because no one could move the ball.
You had the fastest.
But that's the point of team, though, is you figure out you don't need all quarterbacks. You don't need all wide receivers, but it's part of the challenge, too. You got to figure out what you're good at. And, I just think that takes work. People don't want to work. They don't want to get out of their comfort zone. They only do what they
only
want
certain roles. It's like, I want that role, which is what I love about that scripture. Is it 1 Corinthians? He's talking about the body of Christ, and we're all members. And there's that line: the foot can't say to the hand, "I don't need you."
Yeah,
I love that because I feel like there's too much of "I don't need you" going on. Whether you see that in college football, like, "Hey, I'm good." Like, I don't. When really we do need each other. Regardless of role, like we need all the roles and we need them all working together. that's the beauty of the body of Christ, man. It's team.
Yeah,
I think that's,
and I think there's a lot of coaches out there that went into the sport because they wanted to develop a team. They wanted to mature young men, and I saw where. His last name is Bennett. He coached Virginia Cavaliers in basketball. He won a national title about 5-6 years ago.
Okay.
He quit right before the season started this year. And basically, I read his comments, and he's like, the game has changed, and I don't have an aptitude for what it requires now. I can't develop a roster. I can't pour my life into a kid for 4 or 5 years. I can't see the light bulb moments where they get it after 2 years of working hard and they finally get in PT. He's like, those days are gone. And he said, I want to do the university the service of saying I'm not your guy anymore. And he just walked.
Wow.
And I got to believe there's a bunch of people out there.
Yeah.
And I would just say, from the same way in a church perspective, those are the things that you invest your life. You want to see people with a common goal and a common purpose, self-sacrificing, and who cares who gets the credit? Don't make it. Those are the things you live for. I know as a pastor, and that's one of the hard things about team. We've had people who wanted to be a part of this team who lost their way, and it's kind of like, hey, you'll find another team, but this is not for you. You don't want to do it this way anymore. That's fine. Those are hard conversations, but they have to be had. And I'm thankful to be a part of a church that values team and knows that we get our instructions from the Lord, and we're just working for Him. And also thankful to be a part of a team or a church where it's not about what do I get? What do you get? How much acclaim are we getting? People are just pulling the same way.
It's almost like God knew what He was doing when He told us to, humble yourselves. Therefore, because that a lot of that, we see the opposite of that happening in college football right now. Everybody's just priding themselves on how much money, and it's all their name, their image, their likeness, and how much can I promote that, and how much can I make. And I think we're seeing the devastation of that, and they're missing out on some really cool benefits. And, you said this early on when I was like, this is probably over 10 years ago, that, and yes, God moves people around, but if you stay somewhere long enough, there's benefits at the end of that road that you only get if you stay. And I think that's what a lot of players are going to miss out on, is that they're missing out on benefits they'll never know.
Yeah.
Because they're leaving so soon. And there's a coach that's an example of someone, he saw that from the coach's perspective. And he's basically like, I don't want to be a part of that, because he realizes everything that he loves about coaching is now stripped away. And that's sad, because on both accounts, for a coach to be robbed of that opportunity, but also for these young men to miss out on having those benefits and rewards that come year 3 and 4 that you never get in year 1 or 2. I mean, really.
Yeah.
Even the kid who shows up on whoever wins the national championship this year, they'll be freshmen on that team, and they will have showed up and won a national title. Okay, you might say that's the ultimate goal. Okay, that's a cool goal, but as a former college athlete, I would say that, I never won a national title, so there's that.
Yeah.
But I don't think while that's neat, and even as I hear, we watch the Peyton and Eli on Monday nights, it's like I hear from guys who do have titles and do have all those were great, but I hear them alluding to things about team that they loved most, that they enjoyed, that were earned, that's beyond these titles. And so I hate it for even that freshman that shows up and gets the national title, whatever team that is. If they leave, they're going to miss out on some reward that I think are the lasting memories that are with you for a lifetime. And that's sad. So, but I'm thankful, like to your point, I mean, it's the Bible really is, it's great because God knows what He's doing, and staff is meant to be team. I've always been saddened to hear, you and Mike have a good read of kind of what's going on around the state. And I've always been really sad hearing about it's very rare to have a church staff that's unified and just together. And you hear of a lot of dysfunction and disunity, and you're like, man, that's sad.
Yeah, because we're copying culture. We're not. It's unfortunate.
So I'm grateful, for our church staff, the unity there. And I do think that, a church is blessed by that. And then, our church, I feel like people are finding their roles. And so that's fun. And so it's a good conversation.
Yeah, always entertaining.
It's always fun. So, we hope that this conversation was good. And, hey, maybe you're finding your role, or you're like, I don't know what my role is. That's okay too. Sometimes it takes time to figure that out.
But we'll help you. Yeah.
That's right. To your point, let's listen, let's pay attention, let's jump in and try some things. And if it's not your thing, we identified. Is it fair to say you can't be on the sidelines and say that's not your thing? I think you got to get in there,
get in the game,
and try it. Then you get to tell us, not my thing. Okay, you did it.
Yeah, and another famous saying we always say, we're trying to get the right people on the bus, and then we move them all around once they get them on the bus. Yeah.
So, well, that's good stuff. All right. Well, God bless you, my friend.
Yeah, same to you.
Until next time.